What is up, fellow nerds, and welcome back to the Dapper Snapper Gaming channel, and welcome to not how do I want to do this. This is actually going to be a video about the new Unearthed Arcana that has come out for 6th edition, 5.5e, whatever you want to call it. One D&D is what it is being called, and this is the future of Dungeons and Dragons. I have been discussing this a lot with the community through community posts, but I wanted to actually make a video on it, a proper video going over what all the changes are and give a few of my thoughts on this. I'm going to try to keep the video as brief as I can, so I'm not going to go into a super in-depth approach, but I'm going to try to catch the highlights of everything in this document. So we may be here a minute, so strap in. We're going to have a really good time. Of course, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. As you can see, most people who watch this channel are not subscribed, so please make sure that you do that, because later this week, instead of getting to Moon Druid, which we will do next week, we are actually having a bit of D&D Jeopardy with my D&D group, who you met in the D&D podcast, which came out not that long ago, and we are going to have a really fun time with that, so you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be great. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and start looking at this document here. I opted to not go with any kind of face cam today just because it didn't feel like it, but it's fine. It'll return next week, no problem. So let's go ahead and look at this. So I've been seeing a lot of people online that are saying they don't like the changes, they don't think they're good, but I've also seen a lot of people who say they really like them. So the community is a little split, but that's going to happen anytime that you introduce any kind of new anything. So let's just see where we're at with all of this. So a lot of this first page is just saying, hey, it's playtest material. Hey, the power level is a little bit different. There are going to be feats involved now, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and determining your origin, all these fun things that you can read for yourself. These aren't hugely important to what we're talking about here, just because these are kind of baked into everything. This gives the new formula for backgrounds, and so there is now a feat built into your background now, which we've already seen with books like Strixhaven. We've already seen the feats being built into backgrounds. This is not new, and there's also, it says a first level feat. There are leveled feats in Strixhaven as well, so this isn't new. They've been trying this for a little while. They feel good about it after Strixhaven, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I'm interested to see where they go with leveling all of the feats that we currently know and love, things like Great Weapon Master, things like Sharpshooter, all of those that are pretty standard on a lot of builds. Warcaster is another. Things that people will often take at level 1, you now can no longer take at level 1. Where are half feats going to fall into this? We know they're not going to be first level feats, but where are they going to fall? We don't really know, and so that is going to be a bunch of questions that we're going to have once it comes time. But let's go ahead and jump in here, starting off with changes to the human. There are quite a few changes here. So obviously we've lost a bunch of the sub races here. We don't have a variant human anymore, but it's essentially still variant human rules based on what this is. You know, we don't have the +1 to 6 different stats and things of the normal human. It is going to all be based on your background now. So no more racial ASIs or racial bonuses to your stats. It's all based on your background now, which is a big change. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but so it's not determined here anymore, which I think is fine. I think it's a good change. We'll talk about it more later. But for humans, we can now be medium or small, which is new. There are small humans in the world, and so this allows you to be that if that's something you've wanted to be for a while. 30 feet, that's the same. 80 years on average, that's the same. However, the rest of this is pretty much different. So you gain inspiration whenever you finish a long rest is brand new. This is interesting, and it has a lot to do with the new rules for inspiration, which I am not a fan of. There's a whole section on this later, which we'll talk about, but we wake up every day with inspiration. That is a great thing. It really is, but I wish that inspiration worked differently than what they're making it work now, but you know, they're trying to make inspiration more important in this edition, and I don't know that I like it. Skillful, you gain proficiency in one skill of your choice. That's pretty standard, no problems there. Versatile, you gain the skilled feat or another first level feat of your choice. I like this because humans are supposed to be the catch-all. They can do a bunch of different things really well. They're the masters of none. They can do a bunch of things. So this really fits that because you have the ability to take the skilled feat, which is 3 skills of your choice, or you can take whatever else you want, giving you the suggestion for flavor purposes, or do whatever you want. I'm all for this. I think this is good. I'm not opposed to this new way of doing the human. I just hate where it fits in with inspiration, but that's something separate from the human. So overall, I'm okay with this. I think it's fine. There's a new race, however, coming to this book, which is cool. We did not see this coming, and it is the Ardling. So Ardlings are essentially the opposite of Tiflings. They come from the upper planes, and they have heads of animals, which is so cool, right? I think the visual of that is super nice, and it's awesome. So we have 3 different types of them. What we typically would call sub races now are called legacies for this and lineages for other races, which is totally fine. I don't think the wording there really makes a huge difference, but it depends on what plane you actually hail from, which is really cool. So you can really customize that however you want. They do get limited flight here at level 1. So I know a lot of DMs are probably not going to be super happy with this, but it is a bonus action to fly up to a number of feet equal to our speed, but we do not get any kind of hover or anything like that. So this gives you a lot of movement options. It's essentially a bonus action dash, pretty much, but with flight. So I think it's cool. I think it opens up a lot of options. I don't think it's that crazy just because you don't have hover. So I'm fine with it, and you can use it proficiency bonus times per day instead of having flight all the time. I'm fine with it. That's me personally, but I'm fine with it. And now we get to our Celestial Legacy. This is our subclasses, and so we can take a look at each of these suggested animals here based on which plane you hail from. And I mean, come on, a dude with a pig head, like, that's just great. That's funny. I love that. But based on where you hail from, you could get Thaumaturgy, Divine Favor, Endless Restoration, Light, Cure Wounds, and Zone of Truth, or Guidance, Healing Word, and Animal Messenger. Honestly, I'm a fan of all of those. They're all really cool, and they definitely work. Just picking up Healing Word for free is really cool, especially on something like a wizard or an artificer that typically would not have access to it with the intelligence modifier. That is really cool, although in fairness, we are going to have ways to get access to it with an intelligence modifier in this UA, just through a different thing. But so basically we pick this, and then at 3rd and 5th level we get access to it. This is a big change for this, and going forward is that you get to choose your spellcasting ability at the time that you choose the race. This is great. Especially looking back at old things for the PHB, everything was locked into a specific stat, and that's not great, right? Because then you felt really cornered in what you had to play as with a specific race, right? So this alleviates that entirely, and you can make it however you want it. I love that. That's awesome. You also have resistance to radiant damage, which is also really, really cool. So yeah, they're kind of the anti-tiefling. They're also similar to the Aasimar, kind of, at least the one that can fly. But I mean, overall, they're really cool. I really like them. I think they're a really cool addition. I'm all for it. Dragonborns, there are a couple of changes here. The Draconic ancestry is the same, nothing new there. However, our breath weapon does better damage now. Instead of dealing, I believe it was 2d6 damage, I believe that's right, and then it scaled up from there to eventually 5d6. It is now 1d10 plus your character level, which is always going to be slightly ahead of the scaling, so that's really cool. It's not going to be much ahead, but it is always going to be at least like 2 or 3 points on average ahead of what you had before. So great change, love that. And you can use it a number of times per day equal to proficiency bonus instead of having to long rest before you can use it again. Love that. Really, really nice. We still get our resistance. We get dark vision. Thank goodness. Where has this been? Dragonborns need dark vision. Just, they felt left out, and they have always felt super weak because of this. Are they still weak compared to some of the other races? Yes. Are they way better than they were before? Yes. Thank goodness. That is a great buff. Finally having dark vision was a huge problem for them. Basically, you're kind of out on a limb here with humans, but nearly all of the other ones are going to have dark vision. Ardlings do not, which is interesting. Who knows if that'll make it into the final build. Ardlings, I would say, will probably end up getting it once this comes out, but yeah, I think you'll see that with that. But it's great finally having it on the Dragonborn. Dwarves have a lot of changes, a lot. So 30-foot walking speed now. We are no longer 25-foot walking speed. They've done this to all of the small races where they had a reduced walking speed. It's now standard with everybody else. Great change. Dark vision, that's not changed. Dwarven resilience, it's just been reworded, but it's the same. We lose dwarven combat training, so we had a few weapons that we got proficiency with. Forge-wise, changed how the tool proficiencies kind of worked. I know I'm skipping dwarven toughness. I'll be back to it. We now get 2 instead of 1, and we don't get brewer's tools anymore, but we get jewelers and tinkers instead. Stone cunning is completely different. Instead of proficiency on history checks to like figure out what's going on with some rocks, you now get tremor sense, which is awesome. No other race has ever been able to get access to tremor sense, at least rules as written, not that I know of anyway. Yeah, this is fantastic. I absolutely love this. This is super on flavor with these guys who are constantly working on rock, right? Makes total sense to me. I love that. So you'll notice though, where are the sub races? There are no sub races or lineages for dwarves here. Yeah, so we're just kind of a hill dwarf forever, basically, because we get the dwarven toughness, and mountain dwarves are just kind of out the window. So that's a thing, I guess, but you can just say you're from wherever. You could still say that you're from the mountains, but you have hill dwarf features, at least in the traditional sense. But oh well. Elves are largely unchanged, which is good. Dark vision, same thing. I'll come back to elven lineage. Fey ancestry, keen senses, and trance are all unchanged as well. So coming back to elven lineage, this is slightly changed because we have lost some features in the elven lineages. So the drow dark elf, whatever you want to call it, lost its weapon training, but of course now can cast spells with slots of any ability. No more sunlight sensitivity, of course, as well, which has been a common trend. I hate sunlight sensitivity. It's not a good thing. I think it's a stupid feature. High elves, it was a cantrip from the wizard list. Now it's from the arcane spell list, and of course, so it was locked in with intelligence. Now it can be whatever you want, so that's a big buff. We lose our weapon training from the wood elf, and we also lose Mask of the Wild. But we get these spells here, which are different from before. And of course, the High Elves also did not get Misty Step or Detect Magic before. So those are also new and all really good, actually. So I'm all good with these. Pass Without Trace is kind of your replacement for Mask of the Wild, sort of. It's not exact, but it's close. So yeah, that's pretty much all for elves. Gnomes, of course, get the buff in walking speed, dark vision, that's the same. Gnomish cunning, now they reworded this and it sounds like it's a huge buff, but honestly, I think it's something that was necessary because gnome cunning now works with all saving throws on the mental side: intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, the reason they had to change this instead of it being just having to do with spells is because a lot of monsters nowadays in Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, and what they are going to probably be doing a lot of when they redo the monster manual, is they're taking away a lot of the actual spells that people are casting, and they are replacing them with just features. Now, there are still a lot of monsters just in the regular monster manual and all this that still do regular attacks that force one of these saves. And so now this also counts for that. So it is a buff, but it's kind of in preparation for what they're kind of doing as they take away spells here. One thing that I think of really, like if you want an example of something like this, is the Marut, right? The Marut is the big scary construct that follows you around when you did something wrong, and they have the blazing edict, like big beam that fires out of their chest. It's not a spell, but it is a wisdom saving throw, so this would count where it wouldn't have before. So things like that, obviously that's a really high level monster, but still there are plenty of other examples. This is just one. So I think that's really good. It is a buff overall, being able to cover everything. Whether or not that'll make it into the final, I don't know, but I would imagine that it would, just because of the way that they are changing how things are working. And finally, we have the gnomish lineages here. So we still keep the forest and rock gnome as far as what their names are, but they are both changed slightly. The forest gnome still gets minor illusion, but of course can use any spellcasting modifier, not that it really matters. You also get speak with animals instead of your ability where you can like kind of communicate with beasts. Like it's a strange feature that probably would end up making you just have to make an animal handling check to try to like form sign language to a small like creature. I don't know, it was weird. Speak with animals makes way more sense, and of course you can do this proficiency bonus times per day, which is great. I think that's really cool, and then you can use spell slots after that if you want to, so you can cast that a ton of times per day. The rock gnome is where I'm way more interested, because this adds mending and prestidigitation, which is great. We lose artificer's lore, unfortunately. However, Tinker, which was the old way of this long feature here on the left, has been completely reworked. So we can spend 10 minutes instead of an hour casting prestidigitation to create a tiny clockwork device, and they give the option of toy, fire starter, or music box, which were the only three options before. This gives you the option to really make it whatever you want. And it can just function with any effect of the prestidigitation spell. As you know, prestidigitation does a bunch of things, and so it's a bonus action to touch it, and it does that thing, right? It lasts for 8 hours rather than 24, which is fine because it's a lot more useful now. You can have 3 of them at once, and when they are dismantled or just when they fall apart, you can just get all the stuff back and do it again whenever you want. So if you want to spend 30 minutes, you can have 3 of these things, one that'll light a fire, one that'll put out a fire, one that'll make little noises, like whatever you want to do. I think that's really cool. I think it's a good change. I don't think it's necessarily a massive buff or anything. Getting mending and prestidigitation are both nice. But as far as this part of the feature, it's not a huge change overall, but I definitely think it's more useful in more situations. Halflings. Halflings, of course, get the buff to speed. Brave now applies to ending the frightened condition, which is one thing that I've always wondered, right? If they're so brave, then why is it that they can only stop it from hitting it instead of ending it as well? This fixes that. I think that's a good change. I'm all about doing this. Halflings already are really strong though because of their luck feature. So whether or not this will make it into the final build, I'm not sure, but I think it's fine. I think it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, we also, with Halfling nimbleness, we can move through a space of a creature that is larger than us. This is the same. However, you can no longer stop in the same space as a creature larger than you. In my parties that I've run before, I've never really had somebody kind of do that, but it's a thing you can no longer do. So I think that that's kind of the option of trying to make the argument that you're like, well, I'm on the other side of this person, so technically, you know, this person's giving me cover if they're trying to, but you're technically also in the same space. So it's weird. I think it's probably better that you are not occupying the space of the same person, especially if you're using a grid, then that gets confusing. So I think that's fine. It is a nerf slightly, but it's fine. It's not a huge deal. Luck, of course, when you roll a 1 on the D20 of a D20 test, which is what they're calling it now, which just sounds terrible. I hate the wording there. Then you can re-roll the die and you must use the new roll. That's the same. We also get naturally stealthy, and that was from the Lightfoot sub race. So no more stout, but we get the proficiency here with stealth, which is pretty cool. All good. Orc, there are no changes from Orc, and it's now making sense to me why Relentless Endurance was added to the Orc in Monsters of the Multiverse. So here's the thing, I'll go ahead and pause here to talk about this. Is the change that they made here, that is one of the biggest changes, is that there are no official half races anymore. Half elves, half orcs, the like, right? They're all just combined in, you just can use one or the other parent's stats to determine what you are. So let's say you're half orc, half tiefling, right? Because tiefling's on the screen. So you could say, well, my dad was an orc, and so I took more to my dad. And so you can use your orcish features for your adrenaline rush, dark vision, powerful build, and relentless endurance. But then as far as your appearance goes, you can of course mix orc and tiefling. But from a mechanical standpoint, you get nothing from tiefling. I don't know that I like this, but I also don't know of a better system of like customizing that yourself. I think you have to put in the effort of actually coming up with these half races. But the thing is, it's hard because the only half races that they had in here were things that were really mixed with humans. If you're going to mix things with everything, it's going to be impossible for them to write a half orc, half tiefling, half orc, half halfling, half orc, half, and have it to where it's all balanced. Like that's too much, right? So I think this is the best way that they can do the system. I don't like it, but I don't know of a better way to do it. If you can think of a better way, let me know in the comments below. Tiefling. Tieflings now have sub races based on the abyssal, the chthonic, or the infernal, and they completely change the way that this works, which is really cool. I'm all for having some differences to the tiefling, because tiefling has just been kind of stale for a while. You know, we got a bunch of updates in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes to a bunch of other sub races, but we really haven't seen a whole lot of improvements on that, and this gives you a chance to do that. And these are actually based on a lot of those, which is really cool. So we get dark vision still, no change there. We get thaumaturgy on all of us, which is also really, really cool. I like that. And we get, of course, our fiendish legacy, our sub races. And so we get to choose any of these three. And so we get a cantrip and a resistance, as well as a 3rd level and 5th level, 1st and 2nd level spell, which is really, really good. So if we choose the abyssal, which is closest to the Balsabel, I believe is how you pronounce it, you get resistance to poison damage, and you get poison spray, which is really cool. Poison spray is not the best spell in the world, but it is what it is. We already had thaumaturgy, but we got Ray of Sickness. We already had that from that sub race, but we get Hold Person instead of Crown of Madness. That's a buff as far as I'm concerned. The chthonic, we get resistance to necrotic damage, and we get Chill Touch. This is probably the closest to the Levistus, even though it's kind of, it's not super close, I guess. It's a little farther away. But we get False Life and Ray of Enfeeblement here, instead of the Armor of Agathis and Darkness that we would have gotten with that one. Finally is the classic, the Infernal. We get resistance to fire damage. We get Fire Bolt, and that is the only change from the Asmodeus. The Asmodeus is the exact same here with Hellish Rebuke and Darkness. We just add Firebolt, which is great. We now have a really reliable option when it comes to dealing fire damage, which makes sense on an Infernal Tiefling, which is also cool. The other thing that I really think is super cool about this, and this is just a me talking thing, this isn't like written out, it's that for forever, right, there has been this thing of tieflings can only be red, right? No, tieflings can be a bunch of different colors, and I think that people kind of get it in their head that they can only be red, but like this kind of works around that, right? If you're gonna have fire resistance, traditionally you would probably be red, right? But if you are resistant to necrotic damage, you might not be. If you're resistant to poison damage, you might just be purple. Like it's allowing you to have those options, right? I can't remember what book it was that everybody freaked out about, because there was art of a tiefling that was not red, that it was either purple or blue or something like that. And so it's like, but it doesn't matter overall, right? Be whatever color you want. It's not a huge deal. So I don't see the need to really care about what color it is. It can be any color it wants, right? You do what you want. Okay, character backgrounds. That is page 1 of my script. Character backgrounds. I think this is where we see a pretty significant change just in the way backgrounds work. And in my opinion, it's for the better, because backgrounds, in my opinion, have always been rather disappointing and useless. You'll notice that in all of my series where I'm building all of these things in the How Do I Want to Do This series, I don't mention backgrounds at all. Why? Because it's a non-factor. It doesn't matter when it comes to a mechanical build. Yes, it's good for flavor, but for what I do on the channel, I'm not telling you how to play your character. I'm just saying this is how it could mechanically work, so I don't use it, right? It's something I ignore. This gives you a reason to care, and I think that's fine. I think if they're going to use this kind of a character background system, which does kind of resemble Pathfinder a little bit, but it's fine. We don't talk about it. But one other big change that I love here is that the primary option is that you build your own. Originally, they had it the other way around, right? It was, here are all the sample backgrounds, and then if you can't find one that you like, maybe you could create your own and just kind of make it up as you go, right? It's not really it wasn't a great set in stone rule, and I didn't like how it was set up in that system. This system they've come up with is honestly a really good solution, and I like it. I think it's a good solution to backgrounds. So you get to pick your ability scores, right? Any 2 ability scores that you want, you get a +2 and a +1, or 3 +1s, whatever you want to do. And this is awesome, right? Now, a lot of people are complaining that the ASI not being on your race is a weird change. To me, it makes sense. Honestly, it makes a lot of sense to me, right? You're an orc, right? But you weren't raised by orcs, right? Maybe you're a half orc, half tiefling, right? Maybe you were raised by your tiefling mom, but you're using orc stats. You may have also been the runt of the litter, right? So you might not be particularly strong. You might be more learned, right? You might be intelligent and kind of scrawny. That's a thing based on how you were raised, right? And so I think that that is where this really comes into play. Just because you're an orc does not mean you're this huge buff person. You could be scrawny and smart. You don't have to be. So I think that that is kind of it's kind of breaking those norms here, and I'm all about it. I think that it makes a whole lot of sense. It just opens up options, and that's what I'm all about here, just having more options in the game. Choosing 2 skills, that's normal. Choosing 1 tool, not as normal. Some backgrounds would give that, some wouldn't. The thing about this is that you would sometimes get like a tool and a language, or you'd get like 2 tools and no languages, or 2 languages and no tools. This is just 1 of each, which is really good. So you get 1 tool and you get 1 language from the standard and rare language tables, which is great. So I think that's fine. Here's the thing though, is that it doesn't explicitly say that you know common. And so if you don't take common, then how are you going to communicate with anybody? I don't know that this is going to be an easy thing if people are just not taking common, because then you're just not gonna be able to talk to anybody. And I know that they're trying to be better about the don't assume that somebody knows a language just because they are a certain race, because again, orcs raised by tieflings, you may not know orcish, right? Which is fine, but like at the same time, everybody needs to at least be able to communicate, because just like grunting and making big motions is not gonna work. It might be fun for the first session, but then it's gonna get real annoying if you're trying to do a campaign. So that part is a little strange to me. I'm not as big on it. You get 1 feat, free feat. Everybody gets a feat at level 1. I'm okay with this because they are leveled feats. It is certain feats from this list, and all of these feats on this list, except for 1, are feats that I am okay with. But I also do different things with the rules, which I'll explain later. And it also builds gold buy into this background system, which is cool, right? It's always just been kind of you get whatever, and they're not equal. Now, the thing is that if you're an urchin, right? You live on the streets versus if you're a noble and you come from royalty or whatever, you're probably not going to have the same amount of wealth. And that is the only thing that I'm kind of struggling with, just because I don't know that that's as realistic, I guess. And here I am saying realistic in a game where you cast magical spells, but I'm trying to be as quote unquote realistic as possible here. And that's the only thing I have a slight gripe with, but it is more fair. And so I think I can get over it. Okay, sample backgrounds. We're not going to go through all of these because you can read through these for yourself. And I think the primary thing is building your own background, which I think is fantastic and I think should be your primary option. But I want to talk about the Acolyte since it's right here. Super easy right here. So we have the ability scores of +2 wisdom, +1 intelligence. Cool, that makes total sense to me. Skill proficiencies, insight and religion, makes sense. Calligrapher supplies, celestial, and then magic, initiate, divine. So we're also getting spoilers for how magic initiate is going to change here as well. And then we pick up equipment, a prayer book, the calligrapher supplies, holy symbol, some parchment, a robe, and then you had 3 gold left over, so you get to put that in your pocket. So I think that's fine. I think that's a really good way to do it. And I think that you should just be encouraged to make your own. So I'm not going to talk about all of these because it's a little redundant to just go through each of these individually. So feel free to download the document for yourself from the D&D website and look through all of those for yourself. Starting languages, of course, here, and they changed the wording here to rare languages instead of exotic languages. That is a good change as far as I'm concerned. And then feats. Okay, feats we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail because they have changed a lot of the feats, and in pretty meaningful ways, and in some ways that kind of signal what the future holds for the rest of the books and the rest of the UA, to be honest. So I think this is going to be important. So these are all first level feats. So there are no half feats in here. There is a feat that has been taken off of the half feat list and added to this first level list also, which is pretty interesting. But they are changing these feats quite drastically. So let's take a look at them. Alert. Alert used to stop surprise, but it no longer. And so I think this means that they're killing off the surprise feature entirely, which makes sense, right? It's why the bugbear was changed to where it's no longer a surprise thing. It is if you act before your enemy. And I think that's going to be the new quote unquote equivalent to surprise, but I think they're removing the surprised condition altogether, which is fine because nobody does surprised correctly. I mean, I've been at several tables and nobody gets it right. It's one of those, it's a confusing rule. It's not well written. So either they need to rewrite it in a less confusing way, or they need to just trash it and do it differently. So I think it's fine. I think it'll end up being okay. There is a nerf here though, slightly, because now when you roll initiative, you can add your proficiency bonus. So obviously that's going to be a nerf up until you reach a +5 proficiency bonus, which is very late. So we also get the takeaway of the advantage from enemies when they are unseen. So if they're shooting from cover, then we normally would not be hit with advantage. That is taken away. So that's another nerf to the alert feat. So we've had a bunch of nerfs so far. So what is the buff? Initiative swap. Immediately after you roll initiative, you can swap your initiative with the initiative of one willing ally in the same combat. That's awesome. I absolutely love this feature. I think it's so unique. There is nothing else like it in the game, and it makes total sense. And I absolutely love this. So you can place whoever is closest or whoever needs to get out of a certain place, whatever you need to do for proper positioning early in the game, or just for the totality of it. If you want your healer in the middle and you rolled a middling initiative, you can swap with your healer or whatever you need to do. That's super handy, and I think honestly kind of makes up for the others. I think that that's really, really cool. There's no limit on how many times you can do this. So it's just any combat you can do that, which is awesome. The crafter feat is a brand new feat, which is cool. You gain a tool proficiency with 3 different artisan's tools. Cool, whatever. Discount. Now this is weird. Whenever you buy a non-magical item, you receive a 20% discount on it. I don't know if DMs are really going to buy into that all that much, just because normally that would be a gameplay thing. That would be you walk in and have to persuade the guy to give you a discount. Now it's just, hey, discount, right? And I don't know how that's going to affect roleplay. I have a feeling that that's not going to end up sticking around, because I think that's going to end up getting really clunky. Faster crafting, I think, is fine. When you craft an item using a tool which you have proficiency, it takes 20% less time. I think buff that to like 50% and then take away the discount thing entirely. I don't think the discount thing is flavorful, and I don't think DMs are going to go for it, in my opinion. Healer has been completely reworked from the ground up, because originally it was kind of made for people that did not have any kind of healing abilities, even though it was called the healer feat. And so it confused a lot of new players, and it just was not, it was not great. The healer feat has always been kind of trash. But so they have now completely changed it. So let's see how they fixed it. Now, when you have a healer's kit, you can expend 1 use of it and tend to a creature within 5 feet of you. That creature can expend 1 of its hit dice and then roll that die, and it regains a number of hit points equal to the roll plus your proficiency bonus. So this is a buff, which is really, really good. And the whole thing is that you can re-roll dice as well with the healing rerolls. The healing rerolls also affect any kind of hit point spells. So whenever you roll a die to determine the number of hit points that you restore with a spell, or with this feat's battle medic feature, you can re-roll the die if it rolls a 1, and you must use the new roll. That's a huge buff to healers, right? Nothing sucks worse. Well, there are a few things, but nothing sucks worse than casting that healing word or that 3rd or 4th level cure wounds and rolling a bunch of 1s. That just sucks, and this would help with that. That would help quite a bit, which is really nice. The other buff here to Battle Medic over the original feature is the fact that if the creature was down and bleeding out, then it was just a 1 HP heal, which is fine, right? They're now conscious, but this allows you to use a hit die, which is good, and you can add your proficiency bonus to it, which is good. So it's always going to be a bare minimum of 3, and that's if you roll 2 1s in a row, then it would be at early level, you'd have a 2 proficiency bonus plus the 1 if you rolled 2 1s in a row, which is just incredibly unlucky. But that's still a buff. That's still 2 more. That's still 3 times what you had before. So it's a buff to the healer feat. I think it makes it kind of alluring for your spellcasters. I think it's more so for your spellcasters right now, and it definitely makes a healer's kit a little bit more useful than it was before. So is it a great feat now? I'm not going to say it's a great feat. I don't think it's going to make this like the best feat. I don't think it's going to rise in popularity a ton, but it'll probably get used a little bit more often, but it is what it is. So Lucky Feat. The Lucky Feat actually has been buffed and nerfed at the same time, and I'm not sure how I feel about it in the great balance of things. So we now have a number of luck points equal to our proficiency bonus. So it was 3, but it is now starting off at 2, and then it would eventually make its way up to 6. However, there is a huge caveat to this. They took out the wording of an additional D20. The additional D20 is what made luck broken, because you could walk up to an enemy, cover your eyes, roll at disadvantage, and then use your luck point to roll a 3rd die, and you could pick any of those 3 dice that you wanted. That is not good. That's what makes Lucky so busted. I personally ban Lucky at my tables, but I have a backup kind of thing for it. I use inspiration as luck points while I ban the Lucky feat, so you know, it is what it is. But so this also takes away the abuse of elven accuracy as well, because people would roll with all of that and then roll an additional die, because it doesn't matter. It didn't matter if you had advantage or not before. It's just if you roll dice to do an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. If you already had advantage, doesn't matter. You can roll another one. So you could be rolling 4 dice at once with elven accuracy, and that's just dumb. And so I think that the nerf is good, and I think it makes Lucky a lot more manageable, because it is not nearly as busted, right? Immediately after you roll a D20 for a D20 test, you can spend 1 luck to give yourself advantage on the roll. There you go. If it's a straight roll, you can roll it with advantage, which is good. And it's immediately after, which is fine. If you're going to run luck points like that, that's totally fine. And then, of course, when a creature rolls a D20 for an attack roll against you, you can spend 1 luck point to impose disadvantage. That's essentially the same as before. Before it was that you roll a die and then you take either roll. It's the same thing. So, I mean, it's fine. Magic Initiate, this one has changed quite a bit. It is no longer tied to class spell lists. It is now tied to the arcane, divine, or primal spell lists, which are at the very end of this document. And it's definitely better than it was before. This is a huge buff to Magic Initiate, which has really fallen off in the recent years, especially after things such as Shadow Touch and Fade Touch have been introduced and kind of outshine this one. But so this kind of brings it back, right? So we get 2 cantrips from any of those lists, and we also get a 1st level spell, and we can choose what casting modifier we want to use. This is huge, right? We get to pick if we pick a spell that's normally on the Bard list, then we can use Intelligence with it. So you can now cast Vicious Mockery with Intelligence or Wisdom, as long as it's on the list, and it is actually on the Arcane list. So you could do that if you wanted to. Do I recommend taking that one over some of the other options? No, I do not. But it is an option that you could take if it is flavorful for your character. And of course, you can now use spell slots to cast the spells again if you have the slots. This is wording that we have needed for a while. It's just very outdated. The only casting it once per day, and then you have to wait. I think this is just a huge buff to Magic Initiate, and it's honestly right where it needs to be. I'm not sure how I feel about the custom spell lists and that sort of thing, but I think it'll end up being all right. But this is definitely a huge buff, and it's something that Magic Initiate desperately needed to get on par with the others that are similar. Musician is a brand new feat, so really, really cool. You get tool proficiency with any 3 musical instruments, and when you finish a short or long rest, you can give inspiration to allies equal to your proficiency bonus. This is the problem I'm having with the new inspiration system, is that inspiration is now so cheap, right? You can get inspiration just by existing as a human, or you can get it by playing a little song at the end of a long rest. So therefore, again, when you wake up, so if you've got a human and then you've got a number of proficiency bonus number of allies, then you can just give everybody inspiration at the beginning of the day. Whereas inspiration has always traditionally been whenever somebody does something heroic or does something really funny or does something just memorable, that's when inspiration is supposed to go out. And so this makes it just so easy to get a hold of. And spoiler alert, also when you roll a natural 20, you're also going to be getting inspiration as well. So, I mean, yeah, you can't stack inspiration, and it goes away on a long rest now, but like, I don't want it when it's just that cheap, right? I want inspiration to be special, and it's not in the new system. Anyway, Savage Attacker got a decent buff here, that it no longer is only limited to melee weapons. It will now also work with ranged weapons, which is great. Savage Attacker just, I mean, it makes sense, right? The savage part, I guess, could mean that you're just hitting someone especially hard, or it just means that you are going for a particularly tender part of the opponent's body, right? Instead of aiming for the shoulder, you aim for like the neck or something, right? You're just a savage for doing that instead. So I'm fine with it. It allows you to re-roll the dice and choose either roll. That's fine. It's basically the same either way. It's just you can now use it with ranged weapons. Great buff. I love that. The skilled feat, it is 3 skills in which you lack proficiency. This is actually a nerf because it now no longer works for tools. So if you liked the tool proficiency with skilled, too bad, it's gone. But you also get plenty of other ways to get tool proficiencies now, so it's fine, but it is technically a nerf. Tavern Brawler, I'm so confused about Tavern Brawler. This used to be a half feat that gave you strength or constitution. So the enhanced unarmed strike, that's pretty much the same. You get to re-roll them now if you re-roll a 1 on that D4. So at maximum, you're going to deal a 3 extra damage on there, which who cares? You can now shove as part of the attack action on your turn when you deal damage. So this is kind of building in the Crusher feat into the Tavern Brawler feat, which is good and is a huge thing for monks. We can only do this once per turn, but that is a huge thing for monks. And it's going to get even better a little bit later when we talk about another feature that how they've changed unarmed strikes just as a feature overall. But this is kind of cool, right? It's kind of building in the Crusher feat, and you can of course get this at level 1 instead of having to wait until you actually get the Crusher feat way later, which, because it's a half feat, I'm sure you would have to wait on that one. So that's good for monks, I guess. This would be a good monk option. And finally, furniture as weapons. Like, what? I don't understand why they named it this and why it's limited to just furniture. What happened to improvised weapons? Where did that go? Because that's what you got with Tavern Brawler, is that you had the proficiency with weird stuff, right? And you also can no longer bonus action grapple whenever you use an improvised weapon. Where is that? So like, they buffed it kind of, and then they just took away like one of the better parts of this. So I'm very confused on what they're doing with Tavern Brawler. I'm not a fan of the change of it just being furniture as weapons. I think that's so strange. That's such a weird thing to call it. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. Tough feat is the only feat that remains completely unchanged, which is good. Tough feat is already good. I don't think it needed a buff. I think it's in a good place overall. And so now we just get into some glossary terms that may or may not be changing. Most of them are actually the same, but there are a couple of things that have changed. So artisan's tools, pretty much the same except for the prices. Creature types, this just gives you all the creature types that are out there. Nothing too crazy there. Of course, things like cure wounds not working with constructs, that's always been a thing, so nothing too crazy there. D20 tests, which I think is such a weird thing to call it, but I mean, I don't know, it's weird. Come up with a better term that encompasses ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws, or just say ability, attack rolls, or saving throws, because I think that just is much more clear. Here's one big change though, is the DM determines whether a D20 test is warranted in any given circumstance. To be warranted, a D20 test must have a target number of no less than 5 and no greater than 30. Now the big change here is the fact that we now have a cap on DCs. I'm not so much worried about the 5, I'm worried more about the 30, because even if, you know, a guard has a huge bonus to perception, or there are just so many guards that it's impossible for you to get in without being seen, the rogue says, well, you know, I've got reliable talent, I've got proficiency and expertise in stealth, you know, my modifier is plus like 1,000,000, and so, you know, I'm gonna beat all of their perceptions, so I can just get by it. And I can get above a 30 pretty much any time. The only thing that they have against this is the fact that if you roll a 1, it's an automatic failure. And I don't know how I feel about that at high levels. At low levels, it's not going to come up. But at high levels, I'm not sure how I feel about a cap of 30. I don't know, because people are going to be able to beat that. Bards and rogues are going to be able to beat that pretty reliably in their given like expertise kind of skills. So it's a little weird. But yeah, rolling a 1 now is an automatic failure, and rolling a 20 is an automatic success. I don't necessarily like that. I know that a lot of people wish that this was the rule, and I know a lot of people have complained when your DM says, well, just because you rolled a 20 doesn't mean that you met the thing, because, you know, you rolled a natural 20, that's great. You have a -1, so it's a 19, and the DC was 20, so you still fail. I know that that feels really unsatisfying to players, so I also understand that part of the argument. I still am going to stick with the DM side of me here and say that I would prefer it to not give automatic successes, but that's just me. I know that other people think differently, so hit me up in the comments on that one. But you also gain inspiration here. And the thing is that we're going to talk about this next is critical hits. And this is where things kind of change for the worse when it comes to these quote unquote D20 tests. Weapons and unarmed strikes have a special feature for player characters. Critical hits. So crits, as far as they work the same as before. However, notice the wording, weapons and unarmed strikes. So no spells have a special feature for player characters, meaning no monsters. This could be a problem. This could be a big issue. I actually did a poll on the channel not too long ago when this first dropped, because I knew this would be a big point of discussion in the community. And 46% of you who answered this said that you do not like this change. The next closest was 22% that said you're okay with the spells not critting, but not so much for the DM critting. And man, I am on the fence on this one. I'm on the fence because I know that they're trying to give marshals a chance to shine, because the way that I see it, right, the difference between level, say 6 and 7 on a fighter versus on a, I don't know, a druid, right, is the fact that at 7th level, you would get 4th level spells on the druid, whereas on the fighter, you would get to fight slightly more. But like, you don't get a big massive buff to damage, you don't get a massive buff to whatever, like there's not these things that give you these large jumps in versatility, whereas you're getting access to like polymorph, wall of fire, things that are just like hugely important, right? And you're not getting access to it at all as a fighter. You're just getting to bonk slightly better, I guess, but you're not necessarily getting a better weapon, you're not necessarily getting a bunch of features until you get to key levels, but you're still not keeping up with the versatility that these spellcasters can really bring to the battlefield. And so I kind of understand the spell argument, but monsters not critting, I don't like that. I definitely am not a fan of the monsters not critting, because I have always been of the camp of, if the players can do it, so can the DM. Because that really keeps the players humble. And I think that is a huge part of this, is that the DM can crit you, and that is a very real thing. This takes a lot of the stakes out of a game that has become a lot easier over the years, which is not necessarily a bad thing for new people, but I know that there is a lot of the crowd of D&D that wants to play a tough game, right? That's why people play Tomb of Annihilation, because it's a meat grinder. But like, having crits that can hit you as a player are things that need to be considered. And I think that it is an essential part of the game, and I really don't think that should be messed with. If you're going to change it at all, I guess taking it away from spells is okay, but I would prefer it stay the way it is, in my opinion. I would prefer it stay exactly the same way. Divine spells, that is a new spell list we'll talk about later. Gaming sets, they're just all 1 gold a piece, which seems a little expensive for a deck of cards in my opinion, but whatever. Okay, grappled. They've changed the grappled condition a lot. Well, not a lot necessarily. They haven't taken anything away, they've just added to it. So essentially, your speed is still 0. That hasn't changed. And to escape, you have to make a dex or strength saving throw, which is different, versus the grapple escape DC, which the grapple DC is just strength plus 8 plus proficiency. So, I mean, that's fine, I guess, but it is a difference. And obviously it being a saving throw allows you to add your saving throw bonus if you're proficient in that saving throw, versus you may or may not be proficient in that skill. So it's gonna depend on the character, right? So on some characters, they might not be proficient in dex saves, but they might have been proficient in acrobatics. And so they could have they would have had a better chance getting out there, right? Or same thing with strength checks, strength saves and athletics checks. You may or may not have had proficiency in one or the other, and you may have the opposite of what this ruling regards for. So yeah, I think that this could be a little interesting. And of course it ends if the grappler is incapacitated or if someone moves you outside of the grappler's range without using your speed. This is slightly different, I guess, than the original wording, just because the original wording mentions Thunder Wave about knocking someone out of your grapple range. But this says that if you are knocked out of the grapple range, so something like the telekinetic feat is what comes to mind to me, and something moves you outside of the grappler's range without using your speed, then perfect example would be the telekinetic feat with the telekinetic shove. So I think that is that's probably a buff, I guess, to people getting you out, but I don't know. I'm a little on the fence about this change. But the thing about the grappled condition overall is that it's getting a massive buff, in my opinion. But we'll talk about it here in a second. You also have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. That is new. That has not been a thing before as far as I can find. And then movable. The grappler can drag or carry you, but the grappler suffers the slowed condition. So this is kind of the same. You've always been able to drag people around at half speed, but there is now a slowed condition which imposes even more bad things against the person who is moving you. We'll go ahead and talk about that since they are related. The slowed condition's right here. So limited movement, you must spend 1 extra foot of movement for every foot speed you move. You know, that's pretty normal. That's already there. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Here's the thing, you're gonna stop moving at the end of your turn. So this is only gonna work on opportunity attacks. And you have disadvantage on dex saves. So I guess if you're dragging somebody across a trap, or if somebody like fireballs you as a reaction or some other spell with a dex save with Warcaster or something like that, then you would have that, but I don't know. I think that's a little strange, and it's probably not going to come up that often. I have a feeling that's going to end up being a condition that is either ignored or done improperly for a lot of people. The incapacitated condition, you just now have disadvantage on initiative, which is fine, I guess. I mean, the incapacitated condition can always be worse, in my opinion, because, you know, you're incapacitated. So any kind of making that worse, I'm kind of okay with. Okay, inspiration. The thing that you get a dime a dozen of now, and it's no longer special at all. The major way now, instead of, you know, you doing cool stuff, is you rolling a D20 on the D20 test. So you get a natural 20 on a spell or on a saving throw or anything like that. Natural 20, it's like, great, you get inspiration. In my opinion, that is going to suck all of the hype out of a natural 20. I just think not having natural 20s on spells, not having natural 20s on monsters, because monsters natural 20, obviously they're not going to get inspiration, but they are going to give such a sense of dread. But gosh, I don't know. But so it is a dime a dozen now, but you can only have one. That has not changed. And if you get one and you already have it, then you can give it to someone else. And then you lose it when you start a long rest. That is different, but it's because it's so much easier to get a hold of now. I mean, again, we said the musician feat gives you some. Humans just get it naturally, so it's just super easy to get a hold of. I don't like it. I think it should be more special. The way that I do inspiration at my table is not rules as written. I treat them as luck points, so you can choose to use it after you roll. You can have multiple instances of it. So you can have as many of them stockpiled up as you want if you get them. The only way that I give inspiration out is by winning my Jeopardy challenges or by doing something fun in the game. So yeah, but I also don't allow the lucky feat. So there's no stacking, at least at my table. That's just how I do it. So I know that that's not rules as written. I know that that's probably strange to a lot of people. I know a lot of people probably don't like that. that's what works for my table, and it works really well in my opinion. I think all of my players really like that system, and I think it works well. I think it does its job correctly. Long rest, nothing's really changed about long rests. Musical instruments are all 20 gold a piece, so you could buy a penny whistle or a piano for the exact same price. Great, makes sense. Primal spells, that's just another spell list, which is on the next page. We already talked about the slowed condition. Okay, tool proficiency. I've been seeing so many people online freaking out about this tool proficiency section. Seeing if you have proficiency with a tool, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check that you make that uses this tool. If you have proficiency with the skill that's also used with that check, you have advantage on the check too. This functionally means that you can benefit from both skill proficiency and tool proficiency on the same ability check. This is not new. This is from Xanathars. They have just brought this over from Xanathars instead of it being in the original PHB. Does anybody use this rule? No, I've never seen anyone use this rule, myself included. I literally never use this rule, but I know that it is there. So yes, it's a thing, and Xanathars actually explains it really well in what you can do. So for instance, right, let's say a brewer's kit, right? You have brewer's supplies. You could, with a medicine check, figure out how much alcohol that you would need to give someone as a painkiller. That is something that you would know from having proficiency in your brewer's supplies, and it goes into a medicine check, right? So that is something that makes sense. That makes sense to me perfectly, and so you would get advantage on that check. You're just trying to make sure that they really pass that check because they know everything about it. I think the other one was stone carver's tools with an investigation check on like finding a hidden door in a wall. So you could find a door in the wall, and because you have the proficiency, the other alternative rule would be that you find more information about something or can figure out more. So maybe you immediately figure out the mechanism that is used to open said door because it's made of stone and all this stuff. So that is kind of the way that it works. It's already in the rules, just not in the PHB. Go and read it in Xanathars. It's actually a pretty cool rule, but no one uses it. So it is what it is. Tremor Sense. Tremor Sense is obviously new to the dwarf. It's new to any playable character because we've never had an instance where that is a thing, but you can pinpoint the location of creatures and moving objects within a specific range, provided that the creature with the Tremor Sense and anything it's detecting are both in contact with the same surface. So this is good. This is very good. I think this is a huge buff to dwarves, but it's totally warranted, right? I think it's totally a great change. I'm all for it because the old stone cunning feature was trash and it just never came up. Your DM really had to force it to make it useful, and so whatever. Now this Tremor Sense is super nice. Okay, changes to unarmed strikes. This is kind of significant and is going to be a huge buff for monks, which is good. But monks need all the help they can get. Does it make them viable? No, but it's still a huge buff. So an unarmed strike is a melee attack that involves using your body to damage, grapple, or shove a target within your reach. So the grapple and shove actions have now been combined into the unarmed strike feature. They are no longer separate things that have separate checks. It is an attack roll now. You have to beat their AC in order to grapple or shove someone. This is a big buff to all of your monks out there because now you can shove on your first attack and knock them prone. No saving throw as long as you hit on that first one, and of course you're using dexterity because you have martial arts, and so you knock them down and now you have advantage on the rest of your crazy strikes. And if you missed on that one, you can do it again if you wanted to. If you have Tavern Brawler, then you can do the damage and knock them down, so that's also a thing. So that's cool. Grappling, of course, here's where it talks about the DC. I don't think it's going to really help, particularly for grappling as far as monks go, just because strength is not normally your thing. It's normally dex. So, but overall, this is going to make a huge change when it comes to monks, because now they can shove very, very reliably, at least as reliably as you can hit an attack. And so then that is a great free advantage for you and your friends. That's a big buff, and I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's warranted. I don't know if I like it or not, because that gives no chance for a save. I think it can end up turning kind of dangerous really quickly if you're not careful. So I don't know that this will make it into the final build, just because of how much it could end up affecting things. But it is a huge buff to monks, so it is what it is. Okay. Finally, last section, we are on our spell lists here, and I'm not going to read every spell that's on this list because I just don't want to, but I do want to mention a few notable things. Number one, do you see Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade? Because I sure don't. So they do not have them included on this list. I didn't figure that they would, because those are very, very good cantrips, and they are used on tons of builds. But they are not on here. So will Magic Initiate only be able to take things on this list, meaning Magic Initiate can no longer be used to take Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade? That could be the case. And so if it is not on your new spell list for your class, you just straight up can't get it. And that's a big change. You would have to multi-class in order to get access to it, which could be more costly than just taking a feat, because you get so much more out of the Magic Initiate feat. So big change there. A lot of these arcane spells that come strictly from the sorcerer or the wizard spell list now could be taken by clerics and druids to be used with wisdom. So that's a pretty big buff here. Healing Word can be used with intelligence from this list if you wanted to take that. And honestly, this is a big thing here, because Fairy Fire is the same thing. Fairy Fire is already on the charisma list and it's already on the wisdom list, but it is not on the intelligent list. So your intelligence based DC for artificers or for wizards could be used for Fairy Fire here, and that sounds dangerous. So that is definitely a big buff for wizards, not that they needed any help. And finally, I wanted to talk about Shillelagh. Shillelagh here being on the primal list is really interesting for people who want to use a club as a wizard or as a swords bard or a paladin or whatever, that do not want to have to take that one level of Hexblade just to be able to hit with charisma. Now obviously Hexblade also gets you armor proficiency and shield proficiency and things. There's more there to that obviously, but things like the wizard normally would need to take 3 levels of artificer in order to be able to hit with intelligence. So that's kind of a buff, right? Obviously you can't dual wield with these because you can only have one shillelagh up at once, but it's still a buff. And so that's, I mean, we're buffing wizards a lot here, and that's a little dangerous. So we'll just have to see if they end up nerfing wizards in the future when we go into actually how the classes go in a future UA. So that is all for the changes in this new UA. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I know we talked about a lot, but I just wanted to knock all of this out in one big video, so I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss our Jeopardy later this week, and of course we are continuing with How Do I Want to Do This next week when we cover the Moon Druid. So until next time, stay safe out there, stay healthy, we'll see you later, bye-bye.